People talk about California like it is just beaches and movie stars and overpriced avocado toast. They mention the Golden Gate Bridge, Disneyland, maybe a vineyard somewhere in Napa if they are feeling sophisticated. And sure, all of that exists. But nobody tells you about the other California. The one with rocks that move on their own in the middle of the desert. A dome built on instructions from Venus. A boulder the size of a building where a man blew himself up with dynamite. And an entire mountain made of volcanic glass that will slice your hand open if you touch it wrong. California is not just golden. It is strange. It is ancient. And some of it, frankly, nobody can fully explain. So subscribe and let's start. 10. Mono Lake, Eastern Sierra Nevada. If you have ever driven Highway 395 north of Bishop, past Lee Vining, and glanced to your left, you may have seen something that stopped you mid-sentence. Rising from the surface of a silvery, alkaline lake are dozens of pale, twisted limestone towers that look like the ruins of an underwater civilization that somebody forgot to clean up. They are called tufa towers, and they are not man-made. They are not ruins. And yet, standing among them at sunrise, with the Sierra Nevada glowing behind you and the lake perfectly still, you would swear on your mother's grave that something intelligent built them. Mono Lake is over 760,000 years old. That is not a typo. It is one of the oldest continuously existing lakes in North America. It has no outlet. Water flows in from snowmelt streams in the eastern Sierra, and it never flows out. It just sits there and evaporates, leaving behind an increasingly concentrated cocktail of salts and carbonates that makes the water roughly 2.5 times saltier than the ocean. The pH is somewhere around 10, which means if you could somehow bottle Mono Lake water and sell it, it would be in the same neighborhood as household glass cleaner. Now, underneath this alkaline water, freshwater springs bubble up from the lake bottom. These springs carry calcium. When that calcium hits the carbonate-rich lake water, a chemical reaction occurs, and calcium carbonate, which is limestone, precipitates out and begins to accumulate around the spring vent. Over the course of decades, then centuries, these deposits build into vertical towers. Some of them grow to over 30 feet tall underwater. You never see them unless the lake level drops, which is exactly what happened starting in the 1940s when the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power diverted 4 of the 5 streams feeding Mono Lake and piped the water south to Los Angeles. The lake dropped 45 vertical feet. Tufa towers that had been growing silently underwater for hundreds of years were suddenly exposed to air, sunlight, and wind. They stopped growing the moment they left the water. What you see today is a frozen moment in a process that took longer than most human civilizations have existed. In 1994, the California State Water Resources Control Board ordered protections for the lake, setting a target level of 6,392 feet above sea level. As of recent measurements, the lake is still about 10 feet below that target. Drought, evaporation, and continued diversions have made recovery painfully slow. And there is something else. In 2010, NASA-funded researchers found bacteria in the lake's sediment that appeared to use arsenic in place of phosphorus, challenging a basic assumption of biology. Later studies questioned the findings, but the fact that Mono Lake was even the subject of that debate tells you something. This lake, with its alien towers and its toxic water and its millions of brine shrimp that somehow thrive in conditions that would kill almost anything else, is not normal. And it has been sitting there, quietly being abnormal, for 750,000 years. 9. The Mystery Spot, Santa Cruz. Tucked into the redwood forest in the Santa Cruz Mountains, about 3 miles from the boardwalk and the cotton candy and the screaming roller coasters. There is a small circular area, roughly 150 feet in diameter, where gravity appears to have lost interest in doing its job. Balls roll uphill, brews stand on their own. People lean at angles that should send them face first into the dirt, but somehow do not. A wooden cabin built on the hillside looks like it is about to slide off the mountain, and inside it, every sense you have tells you that up and down have been renegotiated without your consent. The mystery spot was discovered in 1939 by a man named George Prather, who was an electrician, mechanic, an inventor from Fresno. He opened it to the public in 1940, and it immediately became one of the most popular roadside attractions in post-war California. This was the era of automobile tourism, when Americans were just beginning to discover that they could drive places and see things that confused them. And the mystery spot delivered confusion in industrial quantities. The explanations offered over the decades have ranged from the plausible to the deranged. Some visitors swore that cones of metal had been secretly buried in the ground by extraterrestrials as guidance systems for their spacecraft. Others suggested it was a hole in the ozone layer, a magma vortex, or what one particularly ambitious sign at the site describes as the highest dielectric biocosmic radiation known anywhere in the world. Nobody has ever defined what dielectric biocosmic radiation actually is. That has not stopped anyone from nodding seriously when they read the sign. The actual explanation, as far as science is concerned, is less exotic but no less interesting. The mystery spot is a gravity hill combined with a tilted building. The cabin is constructed on a 20-degree slope, and when you step inside, your brain attempts to orient itself using the walls, floor, and ceiling as reference points. The problem is that every single one of those reference points is lying to you. Your visual system, which handles balance, knows it is not. The conflict between these two systems produces a cascade of perceptual errors, making people appear to change height, objects appear to roll uphill, and your own body feel like it is defying gravity. Psychologists at UC Berkeley have studied the phenomenon and concluded that every illusion at the mystery spot stems from the fact that humans judge orientation based on their surroundings rather than on true gravitational. Vertical, take away a visible horizon, replace it with a slanted room, and the human brain collapses like a cheap lawn chair. And yet, even knowing all of this, standing inside that cabin is deeply unsettling. Your body does not care about the explanation. Your stomach drops. Your balance wavers. People who know exactly what is happening still grab the walls for support, still stagger on the tilted floor, still leave shaking their heads. In 2014, it was designated California Historical Landmark number 1055. George Prather built the thing in 1939 with wood and cleverness and a deeply American understanding that people will pay good money to feel confused. Over 80 years later, they still are. 8. Racetrack Playa. Death Valley. There is a dry lake bed in the most remote corner of Death Valley National Park, where rocks move by themselves. Not small rocks, not pebbles, rocks weighing up to 700 pounds that leave trails stretching up to 1,500 feet across a perfectly flat, cracked surface of dried mud. The trails are visible, unmistakable, and sometimes include sharp turns as if the rock decided mid-slide that it wanted to go somewhere else. Nobody saw the rocks move for the better part of a century. Researchers had been studying the phenomenon since the early 1900s, proposing theories that included strong winds, magnetic fields, and of course, extraterrestrials. The rocks are made of dolomite and syenite, the same materials as the surrounding mountains. They tumble down from the cliffs due to erosion, come to rest on the playa, and then at some point, with nobody watching, they go for a stroll. In 2011, a team led by paleobiologist Richard Norris from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography launched the Slithering Stones Research Initiative. They installed a weather station, placed 15 GPS-equipped rocks on the surface, and waited. Then, in December of 2013, Norris and his cousin happened to be at the playa when it was flooded with shallow water and frozen with a thin sheet of ice. As the morning sun warmed the ice, it cracked into floating panels. A light wind pushed these panels across the wet surface, and the panels pushed the rocks ahead of them. They watched roughly 60 rocks begin to move, slowly, silently, leaving fresh trails in the mud. The speed was glacial. Norris estimated that the rocks only move a few minutes out of every million. The findings, published in PLOS One in 2014, describe a perfect combination of winter rain, overnight freezing, morning sun, and light wind. It is a process called ice shove, common in polar regions, but never before observed in a desert. And yet, the mystery has not entirely evaporated. Not every trail pattern can be fully accounted for by the ice model. Some rocks with no ice tracks around them appear to have moved during warmer months. The playa itself is so remote, so difficult to access, and so rarely visited that any observation is inherently limited. Getting there requires a 27-mile drive on an unpaved road that can destroy a standard car. There is no water, no shade, and no cell service. The National Park Service asks visitors not to touch the rocks or walk on the playa when it is wet, because footprints can last for years on the delicate surface. 7. Giant rock. Landers, in the Mojave Desert, about 20 miles north of Joshua Tree National Park, there is a boulder that covers 5,800 square feet of ground and stands 7 stories high. It is purported to be the largest freestanding boulder in the world, although, as you might imagine, the competition for that title is not exactly fierce. It is called Giant Rock, which shows the kind of creative restraint that the desert inspires. For thousands of years, the indigenous peoples of the Joshua Tree region considered Giant Rock sacred. Shamans traveled to it from across the desert to draw spiritual energy from the stone. Then, in the 1930s, a German-American prospector and general eccentric named Frank Kritzer arrived, decided the best possible use of his time was to dig a home directly underneath a 7-story boulder using dynamite, and proceeded to do exactly that. He excavated roughly 400 square feet of living space beneath the rock, complete with rooms, a radio antenna on top of the boulder, and a landing strip nearby for small aircraft. Kritzer lived under Giant Rock for about 12 years. He was known to point a shotgun at anyone who approached his underground home uninvited, which did not improve his social standing. During World War II, his German origin and his radio antenna aroused suspicion that he might be a spy. In July of 1942, local police arrived to investigate. The encounter ended with Kritzer detonating the dynamite he kept stored in his rooms, killing himself in the explosion. The circumstances remain unclear to this day. After the war, a man named George Van Tassel, who had been Kritzer's friend, leased the land around Giant Rock from the Bureau of Land Management. Van Tassel was an aeronautical engineer who had worked for Douglas Aircraft, Hughes Aircraft, and Lockheed. He had been Howard Hughes's top flight inspector. He was, by all measurable standards, a serious and credentialed professional. He moved his family into the desert, built a cafe called the Come On Inn, operated a small airport, and began holding group meditation sessions in Kritzer's old rooms underneath the rock. In 1953, according to Van Tassel, a being from Venus named Solgonda woke him up at 2 in the morning, invited him aboard a hovering spacecraft, and gave him the blueprints for a machine that could reverse human aging. Van Tassel spent the rest of his life building that machine, which he called the Integratron. But that is the next entry on this list. For now, what matters is Giant Rock itself. Van Tassel organized annual spacecraft conventions at the Rock starting in 1953. At their peak in the late 1950s, over 10,000 people came each year to camp beneath the stars, listen to UFO contactees give lectures, and scan the night sky for visitors. The conventions ran for 23 consecutive years. Then, in 2000, something happened that nobody expected. In the early dawn hours of March 24th, a massive section of the boulder broke away and crashed to the ground, revealing an interior of white granite that had been hidden for millions of years. The cause of the split has never been definitively determined. Some geologists attribute it to thermal stress. Others point to water infiltration. Hopi spiritual leaders had apparently predicted the event decades earlier, though the details of that prediction are debated. Today, Giant Rock sits alone in the desert, cracked open, graffitied, surrounded by broken glass and tire tracks. There are no information plaques, no visitor center, no rangers, just a 7-story boulder with a dead man's dynamited home sealed underneath it, and the ghost of 23 years of alien conventions clinging to the warm desert wind. If you have been watching this far and these places are making you rethink everything you thought you knew about California, hit subscribe. Seriously, these videos take real work, and knowing you are out there watching them makes the whole thing worth it. 6. The Integratron. Landers. 3 miles south of Giant Rock, on Lynn Road in the same stretch of Mojave Desert, stands a white domed structure that looks like a flying saucer decided to land and then forgot to leave. It is 38 feet high, 55 feet in diameter, and built entirely of wood. There are no metal nails, no screws, no ferromagnetic materials of any kind. The skeleton is held together by wood dowels and a 1.5-ton concrete ring that serves as the keystone. It was designed to be an electrostatic generator capable of recharging human cells, reversing the aging process, and facilitating time travel. George Van Tassel began construction in 1957. He chose the location claiming the site sat on an intersection of powerful geomagnetic forces. Magnetometer readings taken inside the dome reportedly register a measurable spike in the Earth's magnetic field. Compared to readings taken just outside, his plan was to install a rotating armature with 64 aluminum collectors that would act as a massive capacitor, collecting up to 50,000 volts of static electricity from the air. He drew on the work of Nikola Tesla, the writings of Russian scientist Georges Lakovsky, the design of Moses' tabernacle, and what he claimed were telepathic instructions from extraterrestrials called the Council of Seven Lights. Van Tassel died suddenly on February 9, 1978, just weeks before the scheduled official opening. The armature was never installed. The machine was never tested. The man who spent 2 decades building a rejuvenation device ran out of time. After his death, the Integratron passed through a series of owners. Someone wanted to paint it lavender and call it the Lavender Disco. That did not happen. In 2000, 3 sisters from New York, Nancy Joanne and Patty Carl, purchased the property and discovered something Van Tassel may never have fully appreciated. The dome's acoustics are extraordinary. The all-wood, metal-free construction creates a resonant sound chamber with near-perfect acoustic reflection. Sound does not just travel through the Integratron, it wraps around you. The Carl sisters introduced the sound bath. Visitors lie on mats while a practitioner plays 22 quartz crystal singing bowls tuned to different energy centers of the body. The sound, amplified by the paraboloid dome, vibrates through the body in ways that participants describe as profoundly physical. The Integratron survived the 1992 Landers earthquake, which measured 7.3 on the Richter scale, without structural damage. It was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 2019. Robert Plant, Arcade Fire, and the Arctic Monkeys have all had sound baths inside it. 5. Glass Mountain, Medicine Lake Highlands. In the far northeastern corner of California, about 30 miles from Mount Shasta, there is a mountain made almost entirely of volcanic glass. Not metaphorical glass, actual glass. Black, gleaming, razor-sharp obsidian that stretches across the landscape in a treeless, steep-sided flow that looks like it was poured from the sky by something very large and very angry. Glass Mountain is an obsidian flow that erupted from 13 vents on the eastern rim of Medicine Lake volcano approximately 950 years ago. The flow consists of dacitic lobes that grade westward to rhyolite, meaning the volcano changed what it was producing mid-eruption, which is unusual and has made it a subject of intense geological study. The obsidian is everywhere. Entire boulders of black glass, some translucent when held to the light. Thin strips that fracture along conchoidal planes and produce edges sharper than surgical steel. Indigenous peoples used Glass Mountain as an obsidian quarry for thousands of years, trading the material to tribes 100 miles away. Collecting obsidian is strictly prohibited by federal law. There are no facilities. The surface is sharp enough to require sturdy shoes if you want to leave with all your fingers. Medicine Lake volcano itself is the largest by volume in the Cascade Range, covering over 800 square miles. The small lake inside its caldera has no known outlets, yet the water stays clean, a hydrological quirk never fully explained. 4. Devil's Postpile, Eastern Sierra Nevada. Near Mammoth Mountain, in the Ansel Adams Wilderness, there is a cliff of basalt columns that rise 60 feet into the air and fit together so perfectly that the first people to see them thought lumber had been turned to stone. They were not entirely wrong about the strangeness. They were just wrong about the mechanism. Devil's Postpile is a formation of columnar basalt, created roughly 80,000 to 100,000 years ago when a volcanic vent sent basaltic lava flowing into the middle fork of the San Joaquin River Valley. The lava pooled to a depth estimated between 400 and 600 feet. Because the pool was so deep and uniform in composition, it cooled slowly and evenly, which is the critical factor in producing well-formed columnar joints. As basalt cools, it contracts, and the stress is relieved most efficiently when 3 cracks radiate outward at 120-degree angles. As the cooling front propagates downward, these polygonal cracks extend vertically, creating long columns. At Devil's Postpile, roughly 55% of the columns are hexagonal, a rate higher than almost any other columnar basalt formation on Earth, putting it alongside the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland and Fingal's Cave in Scotland. Then, around 65,000 years ago, glaciers scraped away the upper layers, exposing the tops of the columns and polishing them to a satiny sheen. Viewed from above, it is a geometric mosaic that looks like the tile floor of a Roman bathhouse, designed by someone with an obsession for precision. The monument was once part of Yosemite National Park. Gold was discovered nearby in 1905. The boundary was redrawn, and a subsequent proposal called for blasting the Postpile into the river for a hydroelectric dam. John Muir lobbied against the plan, and in 1911, President Taft designated it a national monument. It also includes Rainbow Falls, a 101-foot waterfall that produces rainbows in its mist on sunny afternoons. 3. Lava Beds National Monument. Siskiyou and Modoc counties. In the far northeastern corner of California, on the north flank of Medicine Lake Volcano, there is a landscape that looks like the surface of another planet. Cinder cones, pit craters, spatter cones, and lava flows stretch across 73 square miles of high desert. Beneath the surface are over 700 caves, the highest concentration of lava tube caves in the contiguous United States. 27 of them have marked entrances and developed trails for public access. The rest are just down there in the dark, waiting. The caves were formed between 10,500 and 65,000 years ago, when lava flows from Mammoth Crater and other vents spread across the landscape. As the outer edges of the flowing lava cooled and hardened, the molten interior continued to move, eventually draining out and leaving behind hollow tubes of rock. Some of these tubes are small enough to require crawling. Others are tall enough to walk through upright. Some contain permanent ice formations. The temperature inside the caves averages about 55 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, which means that in summer, when the surface temperature can exceed 100 degrees, entering a lava tube feels like stepping into a refrigerator. But the geology is only half the story. In 1872 and 1873, this same landscape was the site of the Modoc War, the only major conflict between Native Americans and the United States military in California, and the only Indian war in which a U.S. military general was killed. The Modoc people had lived in the region for at least 5,000 years. In 1864, they signed a treaty to relocate to the Klamath Reservation in Oregon. A Modoc leader named Kintposh, known as Captain Jack, led roughly 200 Modoc back to their homeland when the treaty's promises were violated. In November of 1872, the army tried to force them back. Captain Jack led his people into the lava beds and took shelter in a natural volcanic fortress. From behind shoulder-high lava walls, 53 Modoc fighters held off an army force more than 10 times their size for 5 months without losing a single warrior. In April of 1873, Captain Jack shot and killed General Edward Canby during a peace meeting, making Canby the only U.S. general killed during the Indian Wars. By June, Captain Jack surrendered. He and 3 others were hanged. The remaining Modoc were sent to Oklahoma, where most died within years of disease and displacement. Remnants of the war are still visible. You can walk through Captain Jack's stronghold, stand behind the same lava walls, and look down into the cave where he held war councils. In 2017, the Modoc tribe of Oklahoma purchased 800 acres adjacent to the monument, a quiet return to land their ancestors defended with their lives. 2. Bombay Beach, Salton Sea, Imperial County. There is a town on the southern shore of California's largest lake, where the population is officially listed as 295, but probably has not exceeded 200. In years, the lake itself sits 227 feet below sea level. The air smells of sulfur, the water is brown, dead fish and bird bones line the shore in various stages of decomposition, and scattered among the ruins of abandoned mid-century resort homes and crumbling infrastructure are some of the most striking contemporary art installations in the American West. The Salton Sea was not supposed to exist. In 1905, an irrigation canal from the Colorado River breached its banks, and for 2 full years, the entire flow of the Colorado River poured into the Salton Sink, a low-lying desert basin in Imperial County. By the time the breach was sealed in 1907, a lake roughly 15 miles long and 12 miles wide had formed where there had been only dust. For decades, the Salton Sea thrived. It was stocked with fish, marinas were built. Bombay Beach became a resort destination, advertised as California's next Riviera. Celebrities visited, boat races were held. Real estate speculators sold beachfront lots in the desert to people who could not believe their luck. Then the chemistry turned. Agricultural runoff from the surrounding Imperial Valley poured into the lake, carrying fertilizers, pesticides, and salt. With no natural outlet, the salts concentrated. The salinity rose past ocean levels and kept climbing. Fish died by the millions. Birds that depended on the fish died by the thousands. The stench of decomposing organic matter, amplified by sulfuric gases bubbling up from the lake bottom, occasionally carried all the way to Los Angeles, 120 miles away. The resorts closed, the tourists left. The residents who could afford to leave did so, abandoning their homes to the wind and the salt and the heat. What remained was a landscape that looked like the aftermath of a catastrophe, which it was, just a very slow one. Houses with their roofs caved in, swimming pools filled with sand, a dock extending into water that had receded so far the end of it now stands hundreds of feet from the shoreline. The eastern side of town, which was closest to the water, was overwhelmed by flooding in the 1970s and abandoned entirely. And then, starting around 2011, something unexpected happened. Artists began arriving. The Bombay Beach Biennale, founded in 2015, began transforming the abandoned lots and decaying buildings into a canvas for creative expression. Sculptures appeared on the receding shoreline. An open-air church made of weathered wood was erected near the water. A mock drive-in theater was assembled from scavenged wrecked cars. Inside the ruins of flooded homes, murals and installations began appearing. One of the most photographed pieces is Lodestar, a tilted aircraft fuselage that glows pink at night. A large steel text sculpture reads, "The only other thing is nothing." The Ski Inn, the town's only bar, bills itself as the lowest bar in the Western Hemisphere. Its ceiling is covered in dollar bills. The irony is that lots that once sold for under $1,000 now list for $20,000. The Salton Sea continues to shrink. Scientists warn it could lose 40% of its water within 15 years. The exposed lakebed sends toxic dust into the air. And in the middle of all of that, artists keep coming, building beautiful things in a place that is actively dying. 1. The Pinnacles, San Benito County, in the Salinas Valley, about 80 miles south of San Jose, a collection of massive golden brown spires and crags jut out of the surrounding grasslands, like the broken teeth of something buried underneath. They are the remains of a volcano that erupted 23 million years ago, roughly 195 miles southeast of their current location. The entire formation has been slowly migrating northwestward along the San Andreas Fault ever since. A remnant of the original volcanic field still exists near Lancaster, northeast of Los Angeles. The two halves of the same volcano are now separated by nearly 200 miles and belong to two different tectonic plates. Pinnacles National Park, California's newest national park as of 2014, when it was redesignated from its original status as a national monument established by Theodore Roosevelt in 1908, is small enough that you cannot drive through it. The park has two entrances, one on the east side and one on the west, and there is no road connecting them. You either hike through the interior or you drive an hour and a half around the outside. But the most remarkable features are underground. Over thousands of years, running water eroded deep, narrow chasms through the volcanic rock. Massive chunks of the surrounding cliffs fragmented, broke off, and fell into these chasms. Many of the chunks were too large to fit all the way down, so they wedged themselves across the gaps, forming natural roofs over the narrow gorges below. The result is what geologists call talus caves, and they are not caves in any traditional sense. They were not carved by water-dissolving limestone. They were not created by lava tubes. They were created by rocks falling into a canyon and getting stuck, which is perhaps the most honest method of cave formation that nature has ever devised. There are two cave systems open to the public. Bear Gulch Caves, on the east side, were enhanced by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s with stone staircases carved into the rock. The upper section is closed most of the year to protect a large maternal colony of Townsend's big-eared bats. 13 species of bats call these caves home. Balconies Caves, on the west side, are open year-round except after heavy rains. Walking through requires a flashlight and a tolerance for tight spaces. You will duck, crawl, and squeeze between boulders in near total darkness. At one point in Bear Gulch, you emerge into a reservoir built by the CCC in 1935, where the water is so still it reflects like glass, and California red-legged frogs breed in the shallows. Above ground, the park is one of the last habitats for the California condor, with a wingspan of over 9 feet. If you sit quietly on the High Peaks Trail and look up, you may see one gliding overhead, riding the thermals above a volcano that erupted 23 million years ago, broke in half, and drifted 200 miles on the back of a tectonic plate. California is not what they tell you it is. It is not sunshine and startups and surfboards. It is a lake that has been sitting in the same spot for 760,000 years, growing alien towers out of its own chemistry. It is a desert where rocks go for walks when nobody is looking. It is a 7-story boulder with a dead man's house underneath it and a rejuvenation dome 3 miles down the road. It is volcanic glass you can see through and volcanic tubes you can crawl through, and a volcano that split in half and walked 200 miles north. It is a resort that died and became an art gallery, and an art gallery that is dying all over again. And all of it, every last bit, is real. It is just waiting for someone to pay attention. And old men pay attention. Take care of yourselves.